Thank you. And it actually is a privilege. Thank you for having me to kick off your session, your event today with this session. Because, for me, this is truly very exciting because I feel like we've been waiting for so long to get back on this topic, as Yuhun mentioned, about growth for Asia, right? We've been waiting on the sidelines for months and feeling envious of what we are seeing in US and Europe with the travel revenge that's happening. And then we look at Asia and says, the borders are still closed, or the rules are a bit confusing all around. But I would say finally it's now our turn to have Asia back on the recovery trend for travel. And because Asia also have the younger millennial travelers, I think that will be also the driving force behind that. And we need to be staying ahead of that trend and to encourage and bring back that confidence. So today, I would like to invite Juliana from STB to talk to us about how Singapore is recovering and how they have braved it out to open the borders. Jules is the Assistant Chief Executive of International Group at Singapore Tourism Board. She helps bring together over 20 offices around the world of STB to work together to bring more travelers to Asia. In fact, Jules, you actually just came back to Singapore not too long ago, as you were telling me, after having spent over 4 years in China. I'm actually curious, in the last 2 years, did you manage to come back to Singapore during the very confusing COVID situation?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Juliana, but because it's so long, so I told Eric, you can call me Jules. Most of my friends and colleagues call me Jules. Well, I did spend the last 4.5 years in China, primarily based in Beijing, covering Greater China. And in the last 2 years, it has been very, I've actually had a very different life in a sense. Haven't been able to leave China much, but traveled within China, as I know many of you know, both for work and leisure. During that period, I made one trip back to Singapore and had to go through quarantine in Shanghai, in central facilities, just once.
Yeah. But coming to Singapore, you also had to do quarantine back then still?
Actually, we have, Singapore has opened to Chinese visitors since November 2020. Right. So I was very fortunate. I only had to do quarantine upon returning. But yes, it was quarantine in central facilities without food delivery, but I survived.
That was quite an early time then.
It was early 2021.
Right.
Early 2021.
Great, thank you. So next we have Brent, the Regional General Manager for South and Southeast Asia at Tourism Australia. Please welcome Brent. So Brent is, as I learned, the guru of Tourism Australia because he's been with the Tourism Board for over 27 years, and that's your first and only job.
I'm a man, I can only do one thing at a time.
And you've spent, what, over 18 years?
18 years here in
right?
Singapore?
Yes, in Singapore.
Bouncing around the region, yeah.
Right,
So.
and did you get to go back home in the last 2 years?
I went back in November just as Omicron came out and they added 3 days isolation to our trip, but it still was 3 days bonding with my teenagers. And yeah, I think it comes up in the topics we're talking about today. A bit nerve-wracking for someone who's used to traveling every second week.
Yeah, and next, where are you heading?
I'm actually going to Jakarta this weekend, but I'm gearing up for another trip back to Australia in May for the Australian Tourism Exchange. So it's a big first-time event. We've had it in 2 years.
Yep. I'll be there.
Yep, we know.
So to get everyone on the same page first, we'll be hearing from both Jules and Brent on 3 topics. First, the latest statistics and the lessons learned from their borders reopening. And number 2, what can we all do together to emerge stronger from this travel crisis? And third, is sustainable tourism the new era of travel post-COVID? So let's kick it off first with a short video to get all of us in that wanderlust mode.
You think you know Singapore? It's time to reimagine.
You think it's all skyscrapers?
Then what's this?
And this.
And this. And this!
You think it is one island?
Then what's this? And this!
You
think we're a city that never stops.
Then what's this?
And this.
Singapore, you think it's a country?
A city?
An island?
Think again. It's so much
Wow, thank you. So, there was a lot of familiar spots there, but as I was sharing earlier with Soo-Hoon, even the most familiar spots, it's time to rediscover. And I think as the brand says, to reimagine the travel after really taking 2 years of pause. So let's start off with Jules yourself. Since the borders have reopened, right? Singapore was one of our first, if not the first, to really brave it out, to open the borders. How's visitorship been going along?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for allowing me to play the video. I know many Singapore stakeholders in the audience have already seen a longer version during our tourism industry conference a couple of weeks ago. So just like Eric mentioned, I think the key thing, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but when we talk about the new trends post-COVID, I think what is core that hasn't changed is really that travelers will still want to go overseas and have a great time and discover new things. And I think that's really what our new campaign is trying to drive at. And so in terms of how we have been doing in terms of tourist numbers, so most of you would know that actually we reopened to short-term visitors since September last year. So it was, I think, quicker in terms of comparing to the region. And since September last year until end March, we've actually had over 500,000 visitors come to Singapore. Of course, compared to pre-COVID, it might not seem like large numbers, but compared to COVID numbers, it was very, very encouraging. And again, of course, I hope everybody would know that since 1st April, we have a new, much more relaxed travel framework, where right now it's only one test, and hopefully in the near future, even that test will go, and much less paperwork, almost no paperwork at all, just three, four questions on an online form. And we have seen encouraging, we haven't seen the full numbers yet for April, but we're hearing good anecdotal feedback about growth, visitors coming back. So fingers crossed, we will be seeing even better numbers in the near future.
And I would say a testament to that, I just came back, right? So the process was very smooth, actually. So the first time when I came in, definitely there was a lot more paperwork, but this time it's a lot more smooth.
Hopefully that's behind us now.
Yes.
The paperwork.
Hey, Brent, so I know you have some exciting numbers to share with us on some slides, so we can pull up the slides. How is it looking for Australia?
I think a very similar trajectory to what Singapore did. You've got early adopters coming, and it's really critical to get that word of mouth that, hey, it wasn't too bad. Australia, we've got 3 levels of government. So when I went on my trip in November, I downloaded 6 apps to visit 2 states, including the Singapore apps. It was some of yours, but most of them were mine. So it is nerve-wracking, etc. But just some of the early data, we look at very much, you can't drive to Australia. So what's our airfare, air service recovery, as well as what the forward bookings are looking like as well. So first of all, the hand of God, as we're calling it, and the importance of this region as a connecting hub, especially Changi. More international visitors actually come through Changi Airport on their way to Australia than any other destination. So it was critical for us to get those air links up and running, and for when the Northern Hemisphere starts travelling as well. Plus, we're right next door, so it does give us a big advantage there. This is the aviation capacity measured in seats, forecasted out to June. So this is from the Cirium database, looking at what flights are in the system, etc. And that tells us what our job is to sell, initially from Singapore, then the wider Southeast Asia region, and then the Northern Hemisphere coming through. But we've got that connectivity back, and we saw a big advantage in airlines such as Singapore Airlines, which doesn't have a domestic market. So we were very aggressive in encouraging them to come back to Australia. But more importantly, the bookings. Now, this data is week on week, comparing the same week to 2019. and we've hit over 200% of pre-COVID 2019 levels, and it's about 2 weeks old, and the last 2 weeks have also been above 200%. So that pent-up demand that we were all seeing is really starting to come. But I think to Jules's point, getting that confidence, simplifying procedures, having consumers sharing word of mouth has really helped drive that for us. It's a different story. Singapore citizens were the first visitors we welcomed on November 21. But when you look at it across my 4 markets and the regions, that return of aviation capacity at the bottom of the chart, and then where we're seeing those forward bookings going compared to the same week in 2019. So in Indonesia, I'm just looking at the figures for Jakarta, because Bali is very much an outbound for Australia. So it's moving in the right direction. Malaysia is already above 70% of COVID levels for the same week. India is a bit of an anomaly because we only had 7 direct flights from India pre-COVID. You only need another 21 and you're already above 300% of direct capacity. But it's that positive sign, and there's a job for us to do now in filling those seats and working with our partners to do it.
Right. And are you seeing mainly business travelers, or are you able to discern yet? Is it leisure?
The first is VFR, travel for love. Got to go and meet mum and dad, things. Business actually surprised us. And sometimes we sit and look at all our research reports and we don't see the true story, and our partners are really essential for that. So we're really looking at this business travel coming back. And then what we worked out was, if you're a business traveler, I'm going to Jakarta on Sunday. If I have to go into isolation, my work's paying. But if it's me as leisure, I might hold off a little bit while until that mandatory quarantine requirement, which is out of my direct pocket, is gone. So that was a surprise, but I think just events like today, we're sitting in a room for the first time in 2 years. It's good to catch up with people, and those side conversations, all businesses rely on them as well. So that's there. Singapore, in terms of when we look at our purpose of visit, Singapore in terms of holiday visitors, which are our high yield travelers, they're by far already number 1, and that's adding the next 2, 3, and 4 together. Singapore's still ahead. So that early advantage we have at November opening, and that word of mouth is starting to get through. And I just think everyone's just gagging for a holiday.
Yeah, no, it's really encouraging to see the numbers, right? But I'm sure the travel is also coming back in a bit of different form and shape. And I know that tourism boards have been very busy in kind of reimagining that blueprint. So could you share with us a bit more, really, some of the new trends? I think we talked earlier with Siu-Hun about this bleisure trend. Any other trends that you've observed, in coming into Australia, and what the tourism boards have been doing to prepare for?
Yeah, we actually, throughout the pandemic, our marketing changed. We saw a real trend to really immersive. So at first was, hey, we'll see you soon. And then our marketing actually changed to almost entertaining and giving you a little bit of escape from the 4 walls of your house because you were locked in. Sustainability and just nature and wildlife, something we've always been very strong at, but those kind of things really resonated. And the view-through rates of all of our marketing were just astonishing during this period. I think that awareness of, I always use the example of the Singapore hiking Facebook group. It had 40,000 members before COVID. It went over 400,000 within the first 3 months. And because you were allowed,
10% of our population.
you were allowed out. I still don't know how fast brisk walking is, so you can take your mask off. But those kind of things. So in wildlife expansion, from an Australian point of view, our research, we have a consumer demand project, and we're also working on the future of demand research, and it's really showing that exploring diversity, those multiple destinations, combined with, like what you said you did in Thailand, people want to go and tick off the signature things, but add on a bit more. We're seeing a longer trend in travel, so Singaporeans averaged about 8 days. We're seeing 10 to 14 as the average now, because people have pent up leave, pent up savings. And it's really about authentic, and there's a much bigger awareness of sustainability as well. Am I traveling for good? Whether or not it's an actual motivator for destination choice, that's what that future of demand research is telling us.
Right, staying for longer. Are you seeing that for Singapore as well? I mean, Singapore probably being very often being like a transit place as well. So stay, as I know, has been generally short. Are you seeing now a longer stay as a new trend?
So we're definitely seeing longer stays, and maybe to ride off what Brent was sharing just now about which is the first travel coming back. So I was in London a few weeks ago, and one interesting anecdotal statistic that I heard was that 90% of pre-COVID leisure traffic is back, and 60% of pre-COVID business traffic is back. I think this is just pure volume, not obviously. And I suspect when I was speaking with the person who shared this with me, and obviously it's just one statistic among many, I suspect that a lot of it is actually regional. But it does show, as Siu-Hoon was mentioning, in Europe, because they opened up earlier, I think it does show, I think perhaps the trend that Asia might see, where leisure traffic will come back as long as things become simpler and tests are removed, and then business travel will also come back. So that was one area that I wanted to share. And in terms of trends, Eric, writing off that, I think I would say one key thing we all need to do is really to simplify travel protocols. I think at the beginning we almost thought like maybe people will still travel if there are still tests and all that, because they as long as there's no quarantine. But now we are seeing it's not just sufficient to not have quarantine. You need to have simplified protocols. You need to have no tests if possible, and that's definitely one area that I think Asia will also be looking out for. Then I think a second area, again, very similar to what Brent shared, is really sort of deeper experiences. And in this area, I think I often joke that our Singapore stakeholders have had a very difficult time the last 2 years, because you are catering to the most demanding consumers, the local Singaporeans. But I hope what that has done is that you have really had to dig deep and create all kinds of new experiences. I mean, we've shared at our various forums about the wonderful things that some of you have been doing. Maybe I can share one new one that's coming up in June. It's this new platform called Kindred Journeys, which is actually a food platform, a food experience platform, where you'll be able to book an experience to go behind the scenes in a Michelin restaurant, or to do a barbecue pork and beer pairing tasting experience. So that's just one example of, I think, the kind of deeper experiences that people are looking for, and I think Singapore is well poised to be able to ride on that. And then I guess a final trend that, I mean, there are quite a few, but the final trend I would touch on would be wellness. I think the whole concept of physical and mental wellness is something that has come to the fore during COVID. And so this is one area where I think a lot of our stakeholders, and globally, everybody in the travel industry, I think is looking into this area to see how we can cater to tourists who are looking for this. So for Singapore, we are going full out on this trend. And so in June, we'll be launching our first ever wellness festival with our Singapore stakeholders to really put ourselves on the map with regard to this new area.
Exciting. I think for a lot of people, it's been cooped up at home. You know, some of us probably living with parents, etc., with kids. You know, it's a lot of pressure. So I think once we can get back on that trip, I think wellness, mindfulness, etc., definitely is becoming one of the key trend for the travelers. Something that we did also notice with the search on Klook platform as well. Now, moving on to the second topic, emerging stronger as an industry, right? How do we collaborate? Brent, international travel definitely is coming back. I shared earlier the public and the private sector coming together. Can you share with us some successful cases or examples of whereby the private and the public to work together to bring back that trust and confidence to our consumer, right? I think the rules, the airport protocols, that's definitely mainly with the public sector. How about the private? How do you see them to come into play?
I think the key for us, we're a partner marketing organisation. So right at the beginning of COVID, we told all of our partners, hold on to that money, we'll be there, we'll help you spend out of it. And it was lessons we learned from MH370 and our partnership with them. Throughout that, we also recognise, similar to Singapore, our businesses are small, medium enterprises. People were dipping into their retirement savings to keep their businesses open. So there was a lot of, we were quite privileged to be in our position. We went down a few days a week in terms of hours. So we will invest, and we've come out to our partners. Normally we're very ruthless about matching dollars in campaigns, etc. We want to drive cash flow back into your business and then profitability. And then next year, when you've recovered, we'll go back to the normal operating principles. It was also having that confidence that by us having money waiting to spend, they could make decisions if they had to make tough decisions about teams, which teams, because we had an Australian campaign we needed to do. I think the consumer confidence, it's a massive communication challenge, which is our main role. And just getting that succinct information back, understanding how it works, feeding back into our border force, our immigration teams, etc. If it's working, if it's not working, etc. And then just giving hope as well. There was a lot of encouragement and hang in there kind of moments, and we were scenario planning this date, this date, this date, but bringing our partners on that journey the whole time. I think now what we're seeing very strongly is we're not fair weather friends. We've invested millions in these partnerships over years, and to get a return on investment, we're spending now. So yesterday we launched a big virtual travel fair across all 4 of my markets, just to drive that pent-up demand and convert, because we think the time's right. And for Southeast Asia, June is our second biggest inbound period. So, a bit internally, we call it winter is coming, because it's going to be a good show of what this region can do and really encourage that rebound very fast. I think the other one is just look at all your rules. As a government agency, we have a lot of rules, don't we, Jules? We look at them and go, are they rules or are they guidelines? Guidelines gives you a bit of flexibility. We get into trouble for that every now and then, but it's about what's right for the customer and what's right for the partner.
Right. I think you mentioned the marketing front. I think one area that we, for example, working with the tourism boards around the world, we're seeing that creating demand is a lot more important at this time. It's about creating that confidence, that trust. And I think content and social has also evolved so much just after 2 years, right? Now, TikTok is one of the mainstream social media app, and the way that you create content is no longer about 10 minutes video, but how you can also take that 10 minutes video to become short form videos, and it has to have some humor to it, etc. And I think that is definitely kind of a new thing that kind of emerged during COVID, and how we're going to work together, private and public together, for example, on the marketing front and content and social. I think another part is definitely on digitization, right? Technology, and Siu-Hun also earlier mentioned. I am aware that Singapore has been really stepping up on the technology front. Could you share a bit more about that, and especially how the private sector should be really considering on technology?
Yeah, so I think the Singapore Tourism Board has been making quite a big push, at least for the last 7 years, when we hired our first Chief Technology Officer in 2015. And I think that the what's behind it is really, we think digitalization is critical for us, not just to survive, but to thrive in the new era. And so even just in the last year, I think some in the room might be familiar that we rolled out something called T-Cube in April 2021. It's basically a platform in which companies in Singapore can use in order to assess, learn, and build new digital solutions that might be relevant for their tourism business. So I'm happy to share that it's just only been a year, but we've actually had over 100 tourism businesses onboarded into various aspects of this T-Cube assistance that was provided. Many of you also would be familiar, we built something called the Tourism Information Hub. The whole idea is that there is a hub in the middle of information about Singapore, and it's 2 sides. One side is really our Singapore stakeholders feeding real-time their information and content into our hub. And then on the other side, our in-market partners pulling out or maybe sometimes feeding in their information and content. And so the whole idea is that a lot more efficiency, a lot more productivity through this investment in the tourism information hub. So still lots of things we're going to be pushing out in the next few years, I guess. Yeah, but definitely something we want to continue to push even as recovery comes back.
Yeah, I think one area of digitalization that we definitely saw, or I saw on my trip, is payments. So like, in Thailand right now, if any of you guys have been, like the mom and pop hawker center now takes a QR code. They obviously don't take credit card, and I don't think they'll ever take a credit card now because 90% of that hawker business is local anyways. So everyone is paying in using the QR code. But how will a traveler deal with that in the future because we can't access that local e-payment wallet at the same time the person does not have some credit card? Do we go back to the cash era for travel? I think that's definitely a key area that the technology needs to come in to solve.
I mean, just to share, I have been traveling intensely for work. And so in the last few weeks, I was US West Coast, London, Brussels, Paris, Sydney, and Manila. I didn't use cash at all.
And how did you do that?
Every place either accepted credit card,
Right.
either Amex or Visa. So,
Right.
so that was really nice.
Yes. I think for sure, I think we're definitely moving to a cashless society. Next is how do we bring on e-payments as well into the travel scene. All right, so moving on to the last but not least topic of this session is to chat about the sustainable tourism. Is that the new era of travel in Asia in the post-COVID world? So just to share actually a personal anecdote, again, back to Thailand, since I've been there twice. When I went to Phuket and I visited the Maya Bay, and I'm sure a lot of you guys remember 3 years ago, pre-COVID, the government actually closed down the Maya Bay because it was just overcrowding of tourists. Now going back, it's such a serene view. There's like sharks, well, mini sharks that are already kind of swimming by the shore, etc. And I was really amazed and pleased by the infrastructure that was built for Maya Bay. So there's no more boats overcrowding at the bay, but there is a very orderly flow on how boats dock and travelers how going to get to the beach. And you cannot go in and swim because most of us probably have a sun lotion that will kill the coral reefs, etc. So I definitely saw it firsthand how travel is coming back, but also coming back sustainably. 2 years of COVID, I think it gave time to a lot of tourism authorities and as well as governments and private sector to look at how do we bring back tourism and again, sustainably. So on this point, I know that this is also, Brent, you earlier mentioned that it is a key focus for Australia. Anything more that you can share around this?
I think the number one is going to be consumer demand. And it was actually great because if you try to shut down places, you would have a whole lot of protests, a whole lot of businesses you're putting. And I think our focus in Australia, and this is across all governments, was tourism's always been a driver for how do you make a beautiful place economically viable. So national parks, visitation, but controlled, etc. Because we're so far away, we tend to get a high yielding traveller, less mass tourism, but we still saw the impacts on the ecosystem from there. Working with our suppliers, we've really talked up about what are your sustainable principles, not only from environmental, but cultural, etc. Our indigenous populations have started really marketing themselves and telling their story. And this is the longest surviving culture at 60,000 years from our First Nations people. So for us, it was just having a bit of a pause to get all this ready. We had a program called Neki where we went out and filmed and shot professionally. And I think it's something like over 400 tourism products and things. So they had that as marketing to come out, but really taking that sustainable agenda. We're not an accreditation scheme, but who is operating sustainability? And that's who will lead with our marketing. That's how we bring it forward. And you create that demand from the consumer, or the demands from the consumer. You fulfill it with product that are meeting those guidelines. Everyone else has to come along and join that wave. And I think, I fundamentally got into tourism because it was a way of protecting natural areas and having an economic benefit so you could justify that. And most of our small operators, started up because that sunset's really beautiful over there. I reckon people would pay to see it. And so they do it. So Kangaroo Island's a classic.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the millennials definitely start to care a bit more about that. I think in the West, that's already been in the making for quite a while. I think Asia was a bit catching up on that front. But with the younger millennial travelers, definitely this is top of mind as well. And for Singapore, I know that STB has been working with hotels specifically around a sustainability program.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so for those who are not so familiar, Singapore Tourism Board, Singapore has actually been going big on sustainability. As a country, as a government, we've actually come up with a Singapore Green Plan 2030. We like our plans with dates, with years. And the whole of government is rallying behind that. And specifically for tourism, I think mainly because it is the right thing to do. It's something that we have to do as a country, but also because we do see that there is tourism demand, consumer demand coming up. So exactly like Eric had said, we definitely sense it more in the West, but we also sense that in Asia, it's starting to come up as well. And that's really the context as to why Singapore Tourism Board is pushing so hard. So other than the hotel sustainability plan, which we just launched a few weeks ago, which again, very Singaporean, we have clear targets, we have 60% of our hotels in Singapore must be internationally certified by 2025. We are aiming for carbon reduction by 2030. We have a few clear targets that we will work together with the hotel sector on. But I think aside from the hotel sector, we're also working with other parts of our industry. So we're very heartened. Several of our big tourism players have also come on board and set very clear goals. One of them is Wildlife Reserves, who has come out to say they want to be carbon neutral in a few years' time. And even in our food sector and our other stakeholders, there's a lot of discussion and commitment, I think, to want to be more sustainable, which again, I think will be good for us as a destination and as a country.
Yeah. So for us, right, I think this is part of sustainability, but also consciousness, right, in tourism, meaning when you go to a place, you're not hurting the mother nature or you're not causing too much disruption. An initiative that we kicked off pre-COVID, now we love to continue to push through in the next few months, is working with, for example, the elephant camps in Thailand, how to change them into becoming more of sanctuaries, right? So we need the knowledge, we need sometimes a capital, etc. So I think there are many areas that we can all work with to contribute to bringing travel back more sustainably. So thank you a lot for today's. But before I finish off, I'm going to borrow a page from Siu Hun, is to finish off with a rapid fire question with a one-word answer. So we'll start with Jules. Where next, Tokyo or Korea? If both open. Oh, well, Korea is open, but if both are open, Tokyo or Korea? Tokyo, Seoul. No. Have to pick one.
Korea, because it's open.
Okay. Brent, Hong Kong or Taiwan?
Hong Kong.
Jules, winecation or spacation? Winecation or spacation?
For those of you who know me, winecation.
And Brent, soccer or alcohol?
I'm Australian, so the one word was already said, alcohol.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.